All for joining us today. My name is Charlotte Whitefield, and I'm a Community Engagement Coordinator here at WRD. And thank you all for your time on today's call for the RAC for the best practices in community engagement around water projects. So I'm going to get our slides started, and then we're going to go through some community norms for today's meeting, and then we are going to start with some introductions. Okay, and I'm going to ask him to make sure that you can see my slides and presenter mode.
Yes.
Excellent. So once again, thank you guys all for being here. This is the Best Practices in Community Engagement Around Water Projects RAC. And today is September 16th, 2024. So just some community norms for the RAC members. So if you have the ability, please stay on mute when you're not actively talking. That helps us with the sound quality throughout the recording and also for the actual conversations. If you have the ability, turn on your video. I know it is a comfort level for all, so if you would like to keep it off, no problem. But if you have the ability and the wish, please leave it on. It's a lot nicer with such a small group of us to see each other's faces. If you have the capabilities, please use your raise your hand feature. That is normally kept up at the top of your screen. There are usually either a reactions button or there are specifically a couple more dots, and you can use that. If you don't have the capability to do raise your hand, please feel free to just either normally raise your hand so that Kim is able and myself are able to see you, or you are welcome just to interrupt, however makes you feel most comfortable and able to actually engage. And also, we are asking you to try to limit the chat feature the best that we can. That way we can actually keep an open dialogue and everyone will be able to participate. We also have the potential for some members of the public on today's call. We don't have any right now, but once members of the public do join, if they do, we just ask you to stay on mute and off camera, and we will have a public comment period that will start at about 10:50 or roughly so. Today's call, we also have what we are referencing department observers. So as we get through the presentation, this was a multi-agency collaborative process, and we have many of those other agencies on today's call as observers just to help us go through any additional information or clarify and just be present as we continue to learn through this process together. So we have a pretty packed agenda for today, but hopefully plenty of time and to have a group discussion. So we'll be starting with some welcome and introductions, some background on the ORS that actually started this process, a little bit of information on WRD specific rulemaking and the role of the RAC. We'll walk through the rules and the timelines for this specific RAC and WRD's rules. We'll have a break depending on how everybody's feeling, and then we'll spend the rest of today's RAC meeting over an hour having a conversation about the rules and what does this mean for communities and what does this mean moving it forward. And then, as I said, we'll have a public comment. So with that, oh, Kimberly?
Yeah, when we're going through the draft rules and timelines, I just want to clarify when we should be raising comments on the rules, if you want us to wait to the group discussion or if you want us to raise things as you're going through section by section.
So that is an excellent question. So thank you for that. So if you have a clarifying question about any of the content as we go through the PowerPoints, like, oh, wait, what did that mean? Or can you go back to this slide? Please feel free to raise your hand and clarify it then. If you have a comment that really is going to spark a large group discussion or you would like a lot of back and forth on it, you're welcome to raise it on the slide. Say, I would like to go back to that during the group conversation. And then we can make sure this leaves some time for that. We are such a small group that we'll be able to kind of be flexible on how that works. I don't know if that's the clearest answer for you, but when in doubt, feel free to ask your question in the moment. And if I think it's going to be a larger conversation, I might ask if we hold it to the group discussion. Any other thoughts or clarifying questions as we're here? As I said, we're a very small group, so this is our time together, and please feel free to chime in whenever really makes sense. All right, hearing none. So with that, I would love to do a quick group introduction. So I'm going to actually start with the WRD staff, then we're going to go to the RAC members, and then just for the record, I'm going to ask each of the observers just to say your name and your affiliation. So once again, I'm Charlotte Whitefield. I'm a community engagement coordinator here at WRD, and I will be facilitating our RAC today. And Kim.
Morning, everybody. I'm Kim Fritz-Ogren. I manage the Planning, Collaboration, and Investment section at the Water Resources Department.
And Margot.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Margot Moshklovskaya. I am the rules coordinator for this rulemaking. Since I'm new to this role at OWRD, just to give you a little bit more background on myself, I'm a graduate from Lewis and Clark Law School. I'm a licensed attorney in the state, and I specialize in natural resources and environmental law. And before being in my rule coordinator capacity here at the agency, I was working on strategic planning here for about 1.5 years.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to go in the order that I see you on my screen. So let's go to Kimberly, please.
Hi, everyone. Kimberly Priestley, Water Watch of Oregon. And we just want to make sure as to why we're interested. We just want to make sure that the rules follow statute and do invite authentic participation by disproportionately affected communities.
And Christopher Hall.
Good morning, everybody. Christopher Hall with Water League. And the biggest question I have is around the funding and then the potential for manufacturing consent to get water projects through, as opposed to the agency and creating agency within these disproportionately impacted communities, as to the extent to which they can either be moved along to an inevitable consent scenario, or whether they actually have agency to have a voice that has a meaningful impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Peggy Lynch.
Good morning, Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. The League obviously is very interested in public involvement. Personally, I've been involved in public involvement since 1972. So my interest includes making sure that the public participation policies in all the natural resource agencies are similar in nature, even if there are differences in what you actually engage on, so that the public has one set of understandings about how they can participate. Thank you.
Great. Donna Beveridge.
Hi, I'm Donna Beveridge, Union County Commissioner and convener of the Upper Grand Ronde Place-Based Planning Group. We were the first ones to be approved by that OWRD Commission. And I am here to listen and learn, but also to make sure, that all voices are heard, and that OWRD, the state, works with the local elected officials who are representing their local areas. And what's really important to me is that any rules are not a one size fits all, but that we look at the different situations and make sure we have data to back up any decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Cheyenne.
Good morning. My name is Cheyenne Holiday. I'm the advocacy manager at Verde. Why are we interested? We've been following these rules for a while, so happy that they are in rulemaking now. Hoping that they follow statute, but also that community members are meaningfully engaged on projects, emphasizing that not one size fits all, but really getting to what community engagement means for these projects is important to us.
Wonderful, thank you. And that rounds out our RAC members. So I'm going to briefly go through our observers that are on the call, and I'm going to call you out by first name. If you can give your name, title, and affiliation briefly. So Alexa.
Hi, good morning. I'm Alexa Schmidt, Water and Climate Coordinator with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Great. And Chris Marco.
Hi, I'm Chris Marco, Program Coordinator for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund at Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Thanks.
Becky Anthony.
I'm Becky Anthony. I'm a water quality specialist in the water program at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And Nicole.
Nicole Alfafera, drinking water specialist with the Oregon Health Authority Drinking Water Service Program.
Great, thank you. And did I miss anyone on today's call? Doesn't look like it. Excellent.
We do have a hand up though, Charlotte.
Yes, please go ahead.
Peggy, I just want to say thank you to all of the agency people who are here listening in. It goes exactly to what I have been trying to say. I hope that you can all learn from one another and find ways where you can be collaborative in your processes. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Perfect. So just briefly, I wanted to go through the roles of the RAC and then roles of the WRD staff, and then also just touch on the roles of the observers for today. So the role of the RAC is for the RAC members to follow the general RAC operating principles and procedures. We did give out an updated document of that along with your meeting materials. And that includes obviously actively listening to each other, listening and learning, sharing through collaborative processes, and really just having a deep discussion together in order for us to learn about the nuances of the rules and then how this really will impact communities. So come prepared, attend and participate meetings the best that you can. Once again, have your cameras on or off, however you feel really allows you to listen and learn and feel most comfortable, and also provide feedback and perspectives regarding the draft rules and potential fiscal impacts. And we'll get into this later on. The role of the WRD staff here really to help facilitate an open and honest conversation, really to provide the structure for everyone on today's call to learn and to draft the final rules, and we'll go through that process later on. Also not shown on this slide, as we just saw, we do have observers. And these are our agency partners here to listen and learn, and also to help clarify the group background slides. And that will be what we discuss next, but really to help clarify if there's any questions around the multi-agency process that occurred prior to us being here today to discuss the draft rules themselves. So I'll pause to see if there is any question before we kind of dive into a little bit of the background. And I apologize, I'll be talking at you guys a little bit for the first half of this RAC, but we'll have hopefully a very hearty conversation at the end. But as I said, stop me anytime if you have questions. This is our space together. So the next couple slides, I'm going to be doing a very brief overview of ORS 541551. I did provide a copy of that, which is also, I commonly refer to it as House Bill 3293. Too many numbers for a Monday morning. We'll go through a little bit of what was that collaborative multi-agency process that we went through prior to being here today for the rules, and what were all the different steps that we went through to get us here today. So one of the things I do want to stress here is that the founding statute, or House Bill 3293, really called together 6 agencies, and we have representatives from all of these agencies, but one on today's call. One of the agencies wasn't able to make it. But this bill really called for Oregon Water Resources Department, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, OWEB, DEQ, Oregon Health Authority, and Business Oregon to come together to really help shape and form a collaborative process for best practices and community engagement around water projects. What we have on the screen right here, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, was one of the first steps that the agencies did together, which was to come up with a vision statement, something that really helped to guide us as we went through this collaborative process with community members and really be a touch point for all of the different agencies to go back to over the years for us to really reference together. So just as a really brief overview of what the ORS asked for is the ORS requires the agencies to develop best practices in community engagement around water projects. But what it does, it requires each agency to then adopt rules recognizing these best practices by the water project provider, which is the agencies, local organizations, and local governments, which would be those applying for water project support. What it does also say is state agencies may provide water project support. It doesn't require it to be made available to develop and implement community engagement plans related to water projects. However, it does not require the supported community engagement. Make sure I have this clear. If they do support community engagement plans, it does require those community engagement plans to utilize the best practices. So this is a little bit nuanced, and I'm going to pause here and just make sure that we're clear. So the founding statute or House Bill 3293 required all of these agencies to do best practices. And it said that and the agencies may provide water project support for community engagement planning, but if they do, these water projects did have to use the best practices. It did not require that every single funding stream had to start doing community engagement plans or that community engagement plans were required for all water projects. So I'm going to pause and make sure that that is clear. It was a little bit of a mouthful. So just as a review of the process for ORS 541551, it was signed into law in 2021, the fall of 2021, and the multi-agency team started working on this process in April of early spring of 2023. There was a bit of a pause due to resources and also just capacity within the agencies. But at the start of the multi-agency process, all 6 named agencies came together and started reaching out to community members and did extensive research and best practices across different natural resource spectrums and really started to develop a rough draft along with communities of what our guidance document could look like. So in February of 2024, we held a community virtual open house showcasing the first draft of this best practices document. And that was actually attended by 109 participants across Oregon. As we continue to refine this best practices document, we held 2 different community roundtables. For each community roundtable, these were small, intimate conversations of about 15 organizations were invited, and we worked through the best practices document, received thoughts and feedbacks, and edited and built further content within that document. So the best practices document itself was released for public comment in July of 2024, and we received public comments on this guidance document from 12 people with 64 distinct comments across a wide spectrum of different places. So these public comments were, many of which were incorporated into the best practices document, but many of those public comments also helped shape WRD's rules today. We were able to take many of those key ideas and incorporate them into rulemaking. So what is the best practices? So this 10 best practices for community engagement is a 14-page document which really dives into the 10 best practices for community engagement, which were co-created by the agencies on the call, named within the statute, and then also community members' feedback through that timeline. This document is really meant to be a guidance document. And it is kind of the foundational piece, which will help guide all of our rulemakings moving forward and really be informative for additional reference materials. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions. Or if my agency partners want to do any clarifying. The original statute is extremely nuanced, as you could see. I had to go through that a couple times. Kimberly.
Would it be possible to get a copy of the comments on the best practices after the meeting?
Sure. So we do have a summary of the comments, and we also do have an Excel sheet of going through all the different comments. So I'm happy to check in with our WRD staff and provide that with you. And we can also provide a before and after version of the document where you can see where some of those comments were implemented to if you're interested. Are there any other thoughts or perspectives from agency partners before we move into the rulemaking? Okay.
I'll just chime in here, Chris. I was going to be in the background, but this was really important in terms of the background and the nuance that Charlotte's referring to, and that's to say the community engagement plans or planning is not required all out by the agencies. And it's a point that came up in the roundtables. And to be really clear, it's only when the agencies provide the support for community engagement planning. It's just a really important point to realize, and that it's not the agencies require community engagement planning or plans overall. Just wanted to kind of re-emphasize that point because it came up a lot, and we worked with it a lot in the background to develop the best practices. So thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, let's keep rolling through the slides so we can get to the good part, which is group conversation. So I'm going to go through just a couple of the rulemaking slides and provide a little bit more context about what is the process we are doing here and what are we doing. Oops, my slides. So hopefully most of this is familiar to you, but I just wanted to go through the layers of statute, rule, and guidance. So in specifically, statute helps to inform rules, which helps to inform the guidance. In specifically today's conversation, ORS 541551 was the statute that instructed all 6 of the agencies to come together and work for the best and develop the 10 best practices for community engagement, and this shared document, which would be utilized by all of the agencies as they go through their specific agencies rulemaking. So for today, we are here talking about WRD's rules, which will be our OARs 609, 601, which is a new division for us, 1 through 6. And then we are also developing guidance documents. So the 10 best practices document will be utilized as a guidance document for WRD and all of the other agencies, but WRD is also going to be developing supplemental grant and loan guidance specifically for the OAR that we are here to discuss today. So there will be additional information that will be provided to help as we roll this out in our grants and loans program. So just as a reminder, as a RAC member, you're here today to help us provide input to consider for the perspectives to develop the rules are fair, practical, and consistent with the intent of ORS 541551. And we're also asking and looking for information and feedback and perspectives on helping WRD better understand the fiscal impacts and costs of compliance for the proposed rules that are here today. And just a quick statement on the fiscal impacts, requirements, and purposes. These are some bullets that are specific for the information that we need to put into our fiscal impact statement as an agency to go along with the rules making. So briefly, just to go through the timeline for the rulemaking. So now we have our draft rules. These were developed and provided to you in September of 2024. Today, September 16th, we are having our RAC meeting. At this time, we're anticipating holding just one RAC meeting in hopes that we can go out for public comments, 30-day public comment and a hearing in October of 2024 with the goal of attempting to get this in front of our WRDU Water Resources Commission for adoption in December of 2024. This is, as you've seen, as this is a carry on from an earlier timeline, this has been a very long process for us and for the communities. We're really excited to be able to get these rules in front of our commissions and to be able to start implementing these rules in the coming year. So in 2025. Kimberly. Oh, you are on mute.
I said sorry for raising my hand so much.
No,
But
please.
okay. Quick question on the timeline. So oftentimes when there is a rules advisory committee meeting group convened, even if it's just one meeting, there's an opportunity for us to provide written comments to you. I don't see that on this chart. Are you offering that?
Yes,
Okay.
that is an excellent question. So I was going to touch on it
Okay.
later on. We were hoping to open public comment sometime in October, probably October 1st, roughly. So we would be welcoming any sort of written comment for about a week after this RAC meeting. We can kind of talk if that is a reasonable request prior to the public comment.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, in other RACs I've been in, the comments from the RAC are considered, and then they may or may not make it into the draft rules that go out. So are you going to do another set of draft rules, or are these the set that you're sending out for public comment?
These are most likely not the set that
Okay.
we'll send out for public comment. We are anticipating that these will be potentially adjusted based on your conversations today, and then also if you provide any sort of additional written feedback. No, we are 100% welcoming and expecting that these will be morphed based on your fresh eyes and your perspectives so that we're able to bring the best and most current draft to public comment to make that most meaningful for the communities themselves to comment on. Any other thoughts or questions? So, draft rules. And we are making very good time, so I will apologize for going too fast. As I said earlier, this is our meeting to share together, and there's such a small group, so please continue to raise your hands. It actually makes it a little less I'm just talking at a screen. So for the next couple slides, I'm going to be just kind of walking us through the draft rules. Depending on how you like to learn and observe and listen, you might want to pull up your copy or have a printed copy of your draft rules in front of you. I will be going section by section. I will not be reading it verbatim, but I'll be kind of highlighting specific sections just so that you can hear what our thoughts were as we developed it, what were some of the perspectives, and I will actually highlight some areas that have already morphed and are reflective of public comment and conversations we've heard to date. So this will be just an overview, and then we will open it up for a group conversation. So once again, so the purpose, so for WRD, really, the purpose of this is to establish rules to support meaningful involvement of disproportionately impacted communities in the development, implementation, or development and implementation of a community engagement plan for water projects supported by the authorized WRD grants and loans. I do want to stress here that throughout the rules, we are specifically saying development, implementation, or the development and implementation of community engagement plans. We have received feedback and we feel that it's important to allow applicants to do whatever steps they're ready for so that they can do engagement most meaningful for their projects and their communities. It does get a little clunky in the words, so you'll see a couple places as it gets a little bit clunky there. Chris, or Christopher, apologies.
Yeah, Chris is just fine. Thanks so much. Can we back up a slide?
Sure.
So this is probably if I have two major like thoughts or inputs for today. This is one of them, and it's for water projects supported by authorized Oregon Water Resources Department grants and loans. And this is new for me in terms of, I think, what my expectations were with regard to how the statute's worded. The statute says for water projects, and if we look at what water projects are, it's a fairly wide array of different activities like dams, hydroelectric projects of all different kinds, public water supplies, irrigation projects, possibly, the recharge, and there's just all sorts of water projects. And what I'm seeing here for the first time, which is why I'm bringing it up, and I think it merits discussion, is why did Water Resources Department decide to limit in rule the water projects to just those activities that are getting funded by grants or loans under the agency rules under Division 93 and Division 600. Both of those divisions are granting programs for very specific limited types of projects. And so it looks like there's been a big funnel as to really what the community engagement will be. And so if somebody's putting up a dam, they're probably, unless I'm mistaken, they may not be able to form or request community engagement around that. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I may, I've actually just put a note and I would love to continue that conversation and the discussion because I think that several sections here might help to nuance that, but also let's open that back up and have you start the discussion if you're comfortable with that. Perfect, thank you. Any other thoughts on the purpose statement? And I promise we will go back and have a full conversation on that. I just want to make sure that we that feels like a big conversation. So here are our definitions and the actual, obviously the words of the definitions are within the draft rules, but I do want to highlight a couple things here. So for disproportionately impacted communities, we do have a definition within the rule. This is not verbatim for the definition within the House Bill 3293. We have further expanded it based on specific impact or comments that were received during public comment, but also from the Environmental Justice Council on wording and more clarity that they asked for. So this is an expanded definition from the statute, and the statute did allow us the ability to expand it because it said may include. We also, WRD has provided a definition for meaningful involvement within the draft rules. There was not a definition for meaningful involvement within the statute, and there was not a definition already existing within WRD. This meaningful involvement definition was based on the Environmental Justice Council, but then also obviously adapted to make it meaningful for our water projects. So those are the two that I wanted to highlight. We do have obviously additional definitions here, including community engagement plan was defined in statute, water projects was defined in statute, and also best practices. Oh, hands going up. I do not know the order that you went in. So I might just do Kimberly and then over to Christopher after.
Yeah, I did have some comments which maybe are for the group discussion period, but I just as a point of clarification, I think it would be helpful for the ones that are defined in statute. Right now you say has the meaning given in the term in the statute. I would recommend just putting the language in there so people don't have to flip back and forth between the rules and the statute, like community engagement plan, for example, water project best practices. And then there are some missing that I think should be in there that are in the statute, like local organization, for example. I'll keep substantive stuff for later.
Perfect. Thank you. Christopher.
Thank you. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there's, two major issues that I'm thinking about. And the other second one is this one here under meaningful involvement. And that's my question about to what degree are people really involved, and to what degree are they kind of just moved along through an inevitable process that they will eventually learn to appreciate and accept? And how these rules can ensure that communities have agency, because I think the chances of a disproportionately impacted community having agency to stop a project is probably slim to none. And so that begs the question, so then really how meaningful has their involvement been? Have they just, been involved until their consent was secured? And so I just want to bring that up. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. And just so everyone's aware, when you're talking, I'm taking notes. So if you notice me making like a weird little side thing, I have my paper on the side of me. Peggy, I see your hand has gone up.
Good morning. So under meaningful involvement and discussing and listening to Christopher and others, so I come from a land use background, and we are required to have findings when people make comments to make sure that people know that they have been heard, whether they have been included in the decision making or not. They get they see the document and say, you listened to me. I understand you didn't accept my comment, but you listened to me. Or you took my comment and this is what you did as a result of it. So I'm not sure how to incorporate that under meaningful involvement, but I think that that's part of what I'm hearing from some. The other thing is that will affect their environment or health and the outcomes of a water project. What about the cost? The cost to both the community and or to the state? Is that one of the other factors that should be considered? Thank you.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And I might actually ask us to hold that last cost conversation till the discussion, if you're comfortable with that. But I think that is definitely, these are the types of things I would love to have that deeper dive on. Any other immediate thoughts or kind of pins for later discussion on this slide? Okay. So the next slide that I have is just an overview of the funding. And I know that this does get to kind of the narrowing conversation that Christopher, you want to have later on. So this section really does specifically identify out which grants and loans that we are going to be applying these community engagement best practices and requirements to. So this does highlight specifically for OAR 93 and then OAR 600. And then also says that the community engagement plan grantees need to follow all other laws and guidelines for the water project as supported by these two different loan and granting programs. So one thing I do want to highlight specifically here on the funding section is the section that does highlight some of the ineligible costs and the eligible costs. So specifically, community engagement plan shall follow all applicable state and federal funding and procurement laws and guidelines for eligible and ineligible costs. The state of Oregon has extensive lists of different things that are allowed and not allowed with the utilization of state funds. So what we were aiming to do here is to highlight some of the most important ones, and these were really as a result of public comments that we did have. So specifically, ineligible costs are not obviously reimbursable, and these are included but not limited to spending funds on acts of lobbying or fundraising. This really is to specifically focus in the community engagement funds on engaging with communities, not trying to necessarily sway public opinions, sway different people's perspectives. There are additional guidelines within different ORSs in the state that we are also kind of obviously referencing here. In eligible costs, we did want to specifically say these are not limited to, but we want to call out the ability to use funding for facilitation of meetings, meeting materials, the utilization of venues, and also for compensation of disproportionately impacted community members and meaningful involvement in community engagement plans. So allowing individuals to be based on the funding streams to help compensate community members. This is an important aspect that came up in multiple different places within group conversations and public comments. Obviously, additional guidance will be put out with the grants and loans documents as they kind of are up and running for this program, but we did want to highlight this here. So there will be additional guidance of when can you compensate, how can you compensate, and additional things like that of how do you come up with a process for that. So I'll pause to see if there's any thoughts. And I might also actually pause and ask if Kim, if you want to do any clarification on this. So Kim is our the manager of also the grants program. So I just want to make sure that I captured this nuanced correctly.
I don't have anything to clarify at this point, but I'm interested in Peggy's comments or feedback.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kim. I just really want to go to Christopher's comment that he brought up at the beginning. I think this is where you need to have that conversation. Why only these two projects or these two kinds of projects versus all of the others that he brought up? I think it's fair to get an answer to that. Thanks.
So,
and that may be Kim's job.
Thank you, Peggy. So I think that's a really valid point. Maybe I'm just going to pause for a second. Does this group want to have this conversation now in order to kind of help guide the rest of the conversation? I feel it might be a crux of kind of the purpose of why we're here and something that we shouldn't table. I'm seeing Kim nod. So maybe I'll start the conversation with really why have we focused on these two grants, and I'm going to really ask for Kim to chime in and help, I would say. So these two grants and loans programs are really kind of our test bed for this type of process. So just as a reminder, the statute actually tells the agencies that every 5 years we are going to be updating the 10 best practices as needed and also reflect on our processes. So we are really imagining that over time, it is likely that, at least for WRD, we'll find other places and other needs for this community engagement framework. But right now, we really wanted to test how do we do community engagement planning and how do we use these best practices through the two granting programs that are the most logical place for them to start with, and then also would have funding streams to help support these two, or to help support community engagement planning. These two different programs are actually also pretty wide reaching in what they can help cover and the types of projects that they do support. So I'm going to phone a friend and ask him to help explain this a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, so as we noted earlier in the conversation, I'll highlight again that the department may provide water project support. And if it does, then these best practices are required. So it's only in instances where we're providing that water project support. And that's defined in statute And so we're just highlighting, these are the programs where we're offering that kind of support for community engagement plans, either to develop or implement them. And so that's why they're called out in these rules. And so if it is helpful to hear if you think there are other department programs where you feel that the department is offering this water project support that you think are missing, versus the department also has other responsibilities when it comes to like processing water rights, but that's not water project support as defined in statute. That is, water rights processing. So I hope that's helpful. It looks like Peggy, you have a response to that.
Thank you. So for clarity, these grants and loan programs offer an opportunity to actually get a grant or loan to do public involvement. And that's why they're in this process versus the dams and the other projects that Christopher is mentioning, for which there ought to be some sort of public involvement, but you don't have a funding stream specifically that provides for that. And that's the difference.
Well, I would note that both the accounts or funding opportunities in Division 93 and Division 600 do support water storage projects, so above ground storage, so dams, excuse me, or below ground storage. The water project grants and loans, or the water supply development account, has a really broad definition for water project. The water conservation, reuse, and storage program has a narrower definition. It's just those three types. But we do feel, yeah, if you are receiving grant or loan dollars from the agency and you want to engage communities, you should follow what the best practices are.
Christopher.
And I think what just Kim was wrapping up sounds great, that, if you're doing something like that, you should follow the best practices. I think these are great best practices, and part of the reason why I bring this up is because their application could be used wider or more widely. But my real question is, why not include projects that these agencies, maybe Water Resources Department, for instance, oversees, or you're administrating or managing? Why not include projects that aren't grant funded? So for instance, say there's a project that somebody wants to do, they're a private entity and they're applying to the Water Resources Department for a permit, or maybe in multiple agencies for permits. And this is a water project that's in a community, and there's likely a disproportionately impacted community. And why not fund community engagement on those as well? Why does it only have to be grant funded? Because that really narrows the number of projects that this excellent program could be applied to. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think it really comes down to the statute gives us authority to require it when we provide that water project support, which means the planning, technical assistance, or financial support, and review of like water right applications permitting processing is not it's not supporting a water project. It's part of our regulatory responsibilities.
Thought I saw, oh, go ahead. We'll do
Kimberly,
Christopher
go.
and then Kimberly.
Yeah, I guess I actually do agree with the department's interpretation of the statute. Chris, I think I do understand your concerns, and I think they're like, there's a flip side to that. I appreciate that, like, community involvement is great in any project, but another thing to remember is that the projects that the state is funding with public funds, they do require public benefits. And so this, would put more money towards projects that have really, are deemed sort of good on many levels. And while I do agree that it would be great to have community involvement on all projects, sort of the flip side is what if it's a project? I mean, there's many layers to what I'm going to say. One, I think the public, the best practices really actually need some teeth. And so if they have, I think as they stand right now, it doesn't even require inviting the communities. It only requires identifying the communities. So I'm not sure it would be a good idea to spend public funds on a project that maybe has zero public benefit when it's uncertain what the outcome of the application of the best practices is, if that makes sense. So anyway, long story short, I agree with your concern, but I think there's like a flip side to that. But ultimately, I do agree with the department's interpretation of the statute as to why it's so limited.
And Chris, do you want to add one more thing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kimberly. I just know that there are water projects that occur in communities that are oftentimes of great concern to them. And while I wouldn't have thought to circumvent the permitting process, for instance, somebody gets a water right, that was, unless it's like a hydroelectric license, for instance. I mean, say there's a pump storage project that the community doesn't support, such as what's going on in various areas in the Pacific Northwest, or other big projects that aren't funded but would benefit from community engagement. And when I read the statute, I didn't think, oh well, the state has to fund to some degree these projects for them to then engage the community on them. I get the public benefit aspect, however, and thank you for that. And that's really just my comment. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to give just some space if there's any other thoughts here. And then I might ask if we go through the rest of the rules and then continue these trains of thoughts. Hopefully this will kind of help guide us. Kimberly?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I really do agree with Chris's sentiment. It's just the many nuances that I was talking about. I mean, I agree that there are projects that are of concern and the public should have an opportunity to weigh in, but again, it's like what the project proponents would actually do with that is another question, and if it's under the state structure, I think some agency oversight actually is appropriate. And I don't know that you could do that if the project isn't funded through the department, if that makes sense. But anyway, long story short, Chris, I do like the sentiment resonates with me. I just want to be clear on that point.
And thank you for that. And that's actually, we'll get into some of, I hear the phrase, some teeth to what the rules are, and we'll go through some of the different checks and the balances that we have tried to write into these rules, and then highlight how they are different than, or a little bit more directive than what is in the actual best practices document. I also do want to highlight is that every one of the 6 agencies have to go through a similar rules making process. So we aren't going to be the only ones implementing these. So there will be multiple different programs and support streams throughout the state that are going to be kind of paralleling and utilizing these best practices. So I just want to make sure that people are aware that this is not just the only place that we'll use this. Peggy, and then we can move on.
Sure. So to follow up with that comment, so it will depend on each of these agencies whether or not they have a funding stream that actually would support the public involvement as they develop their rules. That's what I think I'm hearing. And that's why in this case, you're narrowing it to these that have a particular ability to fund public involvement. And that may be true in the other agencies.
Yes, that is true. At this point in time, that is the approach the agencies are taking, and we do have a document that I can share. It was brought up during the roundtables that each of the agencies have identified where they see the starting place for these rules are. Okay. Just want to give some time and pause there. Okay. So the next section is the best practices for water projects for use in community engagement plans. And this is where we are recognizing those specific best practices from the guidance document within rule. And the important thing to stress here is that we do list out the 10 best practices within the rule itself, the high level best practices themselves. You'll see that they are in alignment with the document, but the 10 best practices document, sorry, I'm going to be a paper holder. This one does have some additional information in that. So that's why we reference that as really our guidance document. So, just to be clear, the community engagement plans, this is where we kind of dive in a little bit more of what are we expecting out of these community engagement plans that are supported. They need to be designed in a way to promote meaningful involvement of disproportionately impacted communities and be constructed using the department's best practices. The department's recognized best practices. So this is where we specifically say within rules that if you are receiving funding for a community engagement plan, you do need to utilize the best practices. So they are not necessarily optional if you receive funding. Also in the community engagement plan, they need to create a framework for how a water project will engage and provide meaningful involvement and metrics specifically for how community engagement plan participation will be measured and evaluated. So they are being asked to show how are they actually quantifying community engagement and the participation there. And also just making sure people are clear that community engagement plans also have to comply with all the other requirements of those two different grants and loans programs. And I see a hand up. Kimberly.
Yeah, just flagging that I do have comments, but so if we can circle back in the group discussion.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. So now we are going to get into the application requirements. So just to be clear, the best practices for community engagement the 10 best practices are required if you receive funding for community engagement planning under this process. However, we do want to acknowledge and to be cognizant of the fact that not all water project nor communities are the same. So we do want to provide an ability for applicants to have that flexibility. So that is where it comes in this application requirements section. So section 2 of this specifically says a community engagement plan applicant may propose to not incorporate one or more of the department recognized best practices, and then specifically provides a pathway that within the application, they need to identify which best practice does not meet the community engagement plan's desired outcomes for the water project or for the disproportionately impacted community, and then allows the department to decide whether or not the best practice should be used, waived, or replaced with an alternative. So just to be clear that we are asking all 10 best practices to be used. However, we do have a process in which if one of them is not really meaningful or able to be used in a water project or community, an applicant can go through a process to have that either waived or replaced, or for the department to say, actually, you do need to utilize that best practice. The next is a pathway for applicants to propose alternative best practices. So this allows an applicant for one of these programs to say, actually, I want to use this brand new best practice. It asks them to provide what is the alternative, and then to provide information about how does it meet the community engagement plan desired outcomes. And then once again, the department needs to evaluate if this alternative best practice meets its needs, specifically considering the size and the scope of the water project and the identified needs of the disproportionately impacted community. So it provides that flexibility for both the applicant, the community, and the water project to use the 10 best practices, but then to adapt as needed to meet their needs. So I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions in hopes that I kind of articulated that clearly. Hearing none. So the next section, this will be the last 2 slides before we kind of decide to pause as a group or to carry into a group discussion. So the grant agreements sections, this is where we do ask community engagement plans to comply with all grant agreements, and community engagement plan grantee shall submit a progress and final reports to the department based on the frequency of the granting program. And most specifically, sorry, this had to be broken onto 2 slides. These are the 3 things that we were looking for in addition to other requirements for community engagement plans. Progress towards using the department recognized best practices or approved alternatives, and the success of these best practices in increasing meaningful involvement. They need to also describe how, when and how disproportionately impacted communities were engaged and considered in the development of community feedback. And this gets to an earlier comment of any feedback received by the disproportionately impacted community, and specifically outline how that feedback was or was not incorporated into the water project or future water project planning. So that really gets back into that accountability of the applicant to not only hear, but to record and to provide information about how it changed or did not change the water project and why. So with that, I will pause and ask, I will go to Kimberly first and then ask the group if you would like to have a couple-minute break.
So I'm just raising this here, but maybe I could do it in the group discussion, but I unless I'm missing something, which may very well be the case, I don't see anything that outlines the department's decision-making process for saying yes or no to these grants, because you may have, $20,000 and $80,000 worth of requests. So it seems like there should be some criteria for whether you approve or deny a grant request. And maybe it's in there, I'm just not seeing it. And then also, I think there are some sections of, and this is maybe connected to the first comment, is there's some sections of the statute that don't appear to be captured in the rules. Specifically, on the I'm looking at the House Bill version, it's section 3A. And actually, yes, so 3A and B has A, B, C, D. It has like conditions that you guys can put on grants. So anyway, maybe that's for the larger discussion, but I just wanted to state that now as you're finishing the review. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. And let's hold that for the larger conversation if you're good with that. And then Christopher.
Oh, thank you. Before we go on break, I just wanted to not forget this. Can we back up just 2 slides?
Yep, just right there.
Under number 1, and this is a question I have just to sort it out in my own mind, but there's grants that these agencies, your agency makes for various water projects under Division 93 or Division 600. And those obviously, like all grant processes, have applications and reporting requirements. Is what I'm seeing here is that Division 610, which are these rules, are working on adopting the same reporting requirements that are in 600 and 093, those 2 divisions, just for simplicity, or just because they already have really good language on reporting and that sort of thing. So while community engagement grants from agencies must only be pertinent to projects in Division 600 and Division 093, that's one thing. But then these community engagement grants will also adopt some of those practices in those divisions for reporting, for instance. Am I making any sense there?
You are making sense. I am just looking at Kim to make sure I'm answering this right. We are planning on using the reporting and grant agreements for 693 because those are the funding streams that we're going to be utilizing. We are adding additional granting requirements on top of them, which are the ABC that we have on this slide. I'm going to look at Kim and make sure that I'm answering that correctly as our grant expert on today's call.
Yep. So the idea, excuse me, is that if somebody is interested in seeking funding to develop and or implement a community engagement plan through one of those programs, they would need to provide that sort of extra information in their application, and we'll have forms for that. But also need to just be really clear and upfront that they have to comply with the other requirements from the those divisions as well, so they don't think that they're exempt from them. And the reason it's written the way it is that those two programs have just some different requirements when it comes to the grant agreement conditions and reporting. And so we're letting folks know, like, hey, in feasibility study grants, you need to report quarterly because that's what's listed there, versus that there's not that level of specificity in water project grants and loans.
Maybe it's Monday morning and I'm still trying to pull my brain together, but is it envisioned that the community engagement grantees are also the folks who are applying for water project loans and grants?
Yes.
So there wouldn't be a community engagement grantee independent of a water project grantee or loan recipient. Like, if somebody wants to apply to Water Resources Department for a loan or a grant for a water project under 093 or Division 600, they also have the option to request funds, additional funds for a community engagement plan as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I think this is where it also differs a little bit differently depending on the funding opportunity. So with Division 600, often that's what we commonly refer to as our feasibility study grants program. And often in that funding opportunity, folks are interested in investigating the feasibility of a project, and they might take different bite-sized chunks of work in that effort. So that could be one where somebody is, they would just apply for, to develop a community engagement plan or implement one in order to investigate the feasibility or interest in, say, a reuse project in a particular area. Versus water project grants and loans, the projects are to implement the project, and those are scored on those public benefits that Kimberly referred to, that are very specific in statute. And a community engagement plan on its own, I don't think would achieve the public benefits that are listed in statute. And so we need to have them paired together. We have had co-applicants and co-grantees for those kinds of water projects where there's the person who is constructing the project and then a partner. And so that's an opportunity, or they could subcontract out, say they're a district, community engagement is not their bread and butter. They would like some assistance on that. And so they could, subcontract out or hire a consultant or work with a community-based organization to do the community engagement work.
Okay, well, when I was reading the statute, it hadn't occurred to me that a community engagement grantee couldn't be like a third party. So say, for instance, you're in a particular basin, there's a water project grant or loan funded project that's underway, and then an independent third party nonprofit organization or tribe or somebody approaches Water Resource Department and says, hey, we'd like to request community engagement funding because this project is not really like what our community needs, and we'd like for you to fund us because we're a disproportionately impacted community, and we'd like to receive funding from you to organize and collect our thoughts on this project. I got the impression that the statute permitted like third-party organizations to come in as a, and if I understand correctly, what the way these rules are shaping up is that folks who write grants or apply for loans can also ask for extra money for community engagement. And to me, that feels like a slippery slope to just getting extra money to manufacture the consent of the community as you bring in this project. And it's not necessarily the case that that would happen, but it feels like there's a potential for that to happen. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I agree, right? We really want to end up with that meaningful engagement and involvement. We don't want to fund plans or efforts that are yeah, manufacturing that consent. And so finding that balance of how to make that happen is tricky, and we appreciate the feedback on the rules. Similarly, it's interesting on that third party idea of how would providing them funding, if they're not engaged in some way with the project proponents, could also create that opportunity for meaningful engagement. Right, if folks aren't working together, or at least having conversations, we're missing that piece, and then it just becomes that sort of lobbying aspect. I think there's, yeah, trying to figure out how to thread that needle to make sure that these public dollars really are promoting that meaningful involvement and finding a way to structurally do so.
So I might interject right here just for a second. Apologies. We were going to have a 5-minute break, but I feel the conversation is already started. I'd like to just get a gut check with our RAC members. There are 6 of you on the call. If you could just give me any sort of nod, if you would like a couple minutes just to stretch and get ready, or if we could just roll into it. I see Christopher, you're good. Peggy, I saw nodding of maybe we could roll with the conversation. Okay. Kimberly, how are you feeling?
I'm fine with rolling the conversation. I thought the hands up were to a break, so I was confused. So
Okay.
I was saying, yeah, take a break.
okay.
Oh, Chris, you want a break? Okay. Then why don't
Sure, I
we
could
just,
get a cup of coffee.
okay, why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll get back at 10:20 and we will do our 40-minute conversation then.
Did you mean a 5-minute break then, Charlotte, for
5
10
minutes. Yes. Thank you. It's Monday. I'll get my own coffee. Okay. Figure out how to stop. Hey, Kim. I do want to confirm we have no members of the public on. So do I still need to pause for a public comment if there are no members present?
I would verify that with Margot.
Margot, could you verify that?
She might not be back from break. We're still
Okay.
recording. I'll chat with her on the in Teams to get verification.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So I see all of you are popping back on. Whenever you are back, if you are able to either turn on your screen or put something in the chat or raise your hand, whatever, just to let us know that you are back with a beverage or whatever you would like for this Monday morning. Right, I see Cheyenne, I see Chris Marco. Becky is back. I'll just give a pause for, oh, and Alexa is back. Not sure if I've seen Commissioner Beveridge yet. Just give them back one more minute. So let's just get started with a couple logistics things. So we have about 40 minutes left of our conversation here today. I do want to get a verbal check from our rules coordinator, Margot. We do not have members of the public on the call, so we do not need to pause for public comment. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I will hang around at the end of the meeting just to give folks the opportunity if they end up popping in.
Okay, excellent. So we will absorb that time back into our group conversation just so that we can have a little bit of extra time to discuss things. And I think for time's sake, since we're a couple minutes back when we were going to reconvene, why don't we start the group conversation? So just as a reminder, thank you all for being here as part of our RAC. We're really looking forward to kind of continuing our conversation from earlier and getting a good sense of what are your thoughts and suggestions for the rules, in addition to really making sure that we have that feedback on how these rules are really aligning or places where they could better align with the statute. We are also asking for those on today's call to provide us some thoughtful feedback and reflection on how these rules could have an economic impact, specifically for economic impact and analysis, and also through a racial equity lens, making sure that we are very mindful of places where we are or not really being thoughtful about racial equity, what types of impacts may be not foreseen as a result of these specific rules, and making sure that we are mindful of those two things, in addition to just reflecting back onto the statute. So there's a few ways that we could have this conversation. I'm not sure if you want to go once again section by section, or if you want to go back into some of those larger different topics that we've touched on. Is there any strong thoughts before I just take us in one direction? Margot.
Yeah, Charlotte, just wanted to chime in and add for the fiscal and racial impacts. Those include, positive and negative impacts. So we're just trying to capture the scope of how folks are impacted.
Thank you for that. Okay. And I do want to just do a quick check. Cheyenne and Donna Beveridge, are you guys both back from break?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Beveridge? Okay, not hearing anything. They might be having some tech issues, but we can get started. So we have had a couple major places where we've kind of put in pins throughout this conversation. So I'm not sure if we wanted to start from the top and just make sure that we have discussed quite a bit with the purpose of these rules, really for WRD's sake being narrowed in on Division 93 and Division 600. And we talked through the nuances of that. Is there any other places we want to kind of continue that thought, or I see a physical hand from Kimberly.
I'm sorry, I was spacing out for a minute. Sorry. So I'm not sure if you got I think a big one that I would like to get to is the best practices. So just want to flag that if we're circling on big issues.
Okay. Well, would you guys like to start with those best practices as a larger conversation? Keeping in mind that we definitely do want to continue to be mindful of the specific best practices being in alignment with the main document that has gone through public comment and also group discussion with many community members. Happy to start a conversation there, but I do want to just kind of make sure that our goal is to continue to try to keep these in alignment with that document, but love to have that conversation. Christopher.
Oh, thank you. I would like to make sure that we have a substantive conversation on the definition of local organization. I think it was Kimberly who brought that up earlier, and the definition of what that means, because I think that relates directly to the questions that I had right before the break.
Okay.
Local organization is subsection D of section 1 of 541.551.
Perfect.
Thanks
So
so much.
then I think there was some more conversation around definitions in general. So why don't we start the conversation about the best practices and then we'll move into the definitions. Kimberly, if you wanted to start the conversation there.
Sure. Though I did just hear you say you wanted to be in alignment with the document that you finalized. Many of my comments are the same comments I put in the public comment for this document. So if that ship has sailed, I guess that's good to know. But for the benefit of the group, I would say that my concerns about these are some of them really, they don't have the teeth in ensuring you're actually bringing in disproportionately impacted communities. Like for instance, you have to identify them, but it doesn't say you have to invite them. And if you look at the statute, which I know, I'm mixing different sections of the statute, but one of the things that's missing from the rules is section 3 B, which talks about, it specifically says invites and supports. And those words are not in the best, and I know that's separate from the best practices, but it's not in the rule at all. And then the best practices also, I think, are missing some sort of keywords to make sure you're not just checking off the box. I have the same concern as Chris that, unless we're really careful, these rules could be used to manufacture the consent of the community. I think that's a great way to put it, Chris. Because you could say, oh yeah, I identified these communities, check. It's not that you invited them in. And then there's also the other sort of big hole there is I don't really see anything that says that they actually have to consider the contributions of the community. So let's just say there's a project, outside entities coming into a basin with a big project that'll have, harms, ecological, community, etc. harms. They could come in, get this money, but follow these steps, but wouldn't necessarily have to listen to the community. That's sort of my big concern with these. And I can provide, I'll provide specific comments. I tried to do that in my other comments, but I'll reiterate here. But I just think big picture, if the state is going to be funding these community engagement processes, it should matter. It shouldn't be an avenue for project proponents to just get more money and check some boxes without really allowing influence of the communities on their decision makings. So, and I'll provide specific comments, but that's sort of my big picture.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to be clear, obviously we are more than happy and welcoming comments on the best practices themselves, but those type of nuanced thoughts and considerations that you're highlighting could be also incorporated into other parts of those rules without just the best practices. I could see some of those potentially helping to be implemented through some of the parts of the community engagement plan and also with some of the reporting. So I guess long story short, please make sure that you provide these comments and
Okay.
we can make sure that those keywords and if we are missing sections of the statute are rolled in. That's not saying that we are completely off the table from adjusting these best practices, but I think for consistency purposes and those on other agencies on the call, we would love to try to find a way to thread the needle to have that incorporated, but throughout the rules.
Okay. And just one
please.
follow-up. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm
Just
rambling.
one follow-up to that point. Like for instance, on the when I mentioned A, like if you look at A compared to D, you know, with the tribal communities, it says inviting to participate, whereas A, which is great, good, but that's only the tribes. Other disproportionately impacted communities are just identified. They're not invited or supported. So just noting, that's the example.
And I would also like to draw attention to the fact that so we have had a couple of different conversations about listening to and incorporating in feedback. We do have a section in the grant agreements and reporting for community engagement, section 2C, saying any feedback received by the disproportionately impacted communities, they have to identify what that was and how or if it will be incorporated into the community engagement plan in the future water project. So we are hoping to try to incorporate some more of that, but I'm hearing from you that you were hoping to have something with more teeth on that.
Yeah, that they actually, I mean, I think that's good that they have to report back, but that's not the same as saying they actually have to do something with it, one way or the other.
Peggy, I see your hand is up.
So, a very valuable conversation. I cannot follow it without knowing exactly where you're talking. And Kimberly, I just need your help in directing me to exactly what place I'm supposed to be looking at to know exactly.
Sorry, so yeah, so this is the best practices, which is on page 1, 2, 3 of the draft rules. And so it's starts with 1, and so it's, you know, A through J. And the example I was using was A as an example, but I have comments on other ones as well. Sorry, Peggy, I should have been more precise. Sorry
Peggy,
about
would you like me to share it on my screen or just make sure people call out what document and what sections we're referencing to?
Yeah, I don't need the screen. I'd rather see people, but I have the documents in front of me. I just need to know where to look. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Are there any other specific thoughts and questions or comments on section 4, which is the best practices of water projects for use in community engagement plans? We talked about ideas of inviting and supporting communities, how that is really called out in HB 3293, section 3, specifically subsection A, B, and the letters beneath that, and how there's an interest and request to crosswalk some of that more directive language into the OAR. And then also really wanting to make sure that there is an ability for projects to listen to and actively incorporate community's feedback in the project past just in the reporting. And then Kimberly, you're going to provide us some additional specific comments on that. Is there any other conversation we want to have around that section before we go to the definitions? So hearing none, I'd love to maybe ask Chris if you would like to And I see your note, Kimberly. Have a conversation around the definitions and specifically the local impacted or the definition of local organization. But I do want to also say that we are obviously welcoming comments past this RAC. So as we kind of listen, and if people are getting lost or you have an epiphany later, please reach out to me, Kim, we can talk with you and then also submit written comments just to make sure that we're using everybody's time the best we can. But Chris, I hear that you wanted to have a conversation about definitions, so I'd love to open that door.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm, for purposes so we can all be on the same page, I'm referring to the statute at this moment. And the statute is ORS 541.551, and it has a few different sections. And I'm referring to section 1, which is the first section, and then subsection D, lowercase d. And that is the definition titled local organization. And I'm just going to read it because I think that'll help everyone on the same page. Local organization means an organization that A, is a special government body as defined in ORS 174.117, or a federally recognized Indian tribe, or a nonprofit organization, or other organization identified by a provider of a water project support by rule as eligible to receive water project support. And B, subparagraph B is local organization operates in the area affected by a water project. And so when I was reading that, I read the statute in its just plain and simple direct language, which means that a local organization that could get funding by, say, the Water Resources Department or any of the 6 partnering agencies, could get funding and would be eligible to receive funding to engage the public, particularly disproportionately impacted communities. And it seems like these rules have kind of turned that on its head. And I'm not sure, maybe that's why local organization was left out of the rules in terms of the definition, because it would just be really inconvenient. But it feels like that that the rules turn that on its head, almost like Orwellian. And now what's happening is that it's not actually a local organization. It could be local, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be any organization that applies to one of the agencies, Water Resources Department, for a loan or a grant for a water project. And then what happens is that they check a box and say, we also want to apply for extra funding for our public relations arm, which would be the community engagement funding that these rules are ostensibly about. And so then what happens is that here comes the water project into your community, and here comes a slick, paid for by the state, public relations and marketing scheme to engage the folks who are most likely to be negatively impacted to basically move the project forward. And so it seems like these rules actually turn the statute on its head. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And definitely, we'll start out with saying that definitions were definitely not left off purposely. We are referencing as many definitions as we can within the rule as they were. We were utilizing the terms community engagement plan grantee and community engagement plan applicant, but nothing was meaningfully left out by any stretch of the imagination. So I would like to open up a conversation about this a little bit more, and it is not the intent at all to not have meaningful engagement. And our goal is really to make sure that we provide the framework for people to engage. I'm going to have Kim join in because I see her physical hand up and she's ready to go.
Yeah, apparently the host can't actually raise their virtual hand, which is an interesting thing I just learned this morning. I want to note a couple of things. So I've heard feedback that there's concern that certain text from the statute is not incorporated into the rules, and that there then is a concern that it's missing. So we at this point have made the determination that we aren't gonna include all of the statute text in rule, because we have experienced in the past where when the statute changes and then we have to do extra rulemaking, and further our rulemaking backlog. And so our interpretation is that if it's in statute, it applies. We need to enforce that law, and the rules are to clarify what's in statute. But what I'm also hearing is that there's a concern that the text that we have in the rules is maybe counter to what is in statute and therefore missing that legislative intent and that statutory intent. And so it's really helpful to hear, like Kimberly, you're noting, hey, if we just say identify in the best practices, it's missing this piece of invites and supports, or the 2B, incorporating into decision making. That's really helpful feedback to make sure that the rules are aligning, and Chris, as you said, aren't sort of flipping things on their head. So it is, as Charlotte noted, we want to make sure there is that meaningful involvement, and it's not just you get funding and hire a public relations firm. And so I wonder, Chris, if there are other pieces of the rules where you think that that's happening, where the rules aren't in alignment with statute, versus if it's just we don't have that text in the statute, or if you have suggestions of where to put it. Like, I wonder if there's a way for us to edit the definition for meaningful involvement in order to address some of those concerns that I've heard from both Kimberly and Chris. Is that helpful? Or context and explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this first became clear when we started getting in. I mean, I had read all the rules before the meeting today, but it hadn't even occurred to me until I heard it discussed when we got to kind of near the bottom. I think it was 601-0006, and then a little bit in 0005 under application requirements and the reporting and such. That's where it started. I started thinking, oh, wait, third party, local organizations need not apply because this is only an application. It's like a subset of an application that a loan or a grant under 093 or 600 might actually, it might fall under. So that's where I first noticed it. So he said, are there other sections of the rules? Well, it's in 0005 and 0006 where it was like, oh, interesting. I would like to formally request, and I know this will use up a little bit more paper and maybe just a little few more bits and bytes on the computer, but would like to formally request that the full definition of local organization as it is written in statute be included in the rules. And I know it's asking to like extend the rules by about a paragraph or something, but I'd like to request that and then see how everything else shakes out. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that. And Peggy, do you have something you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I'm understanding the concerns, but I'm not sure I understand. So the reason for the public involvement is because somebody wants to do something. And that's the part I think that I'm having trouble understanding, Chris, the nexus to. they wouldn't have a public involvement unless somebody wanted to do something. They either wanted to have do a feasibility study to see if in fact this is something they want to do, or by that time they are going to ask for a grant to actually implement or fund a particular project. For those grants, there is a public process. Separate from that, we're trying to add an element to say that during those conversations, there needs to be a public conversation around whether or not it really is feasible from the community's point of view, or the project really should go through from the community's point of view. So it's not as if, so I hear your concern that you don't want the project person to hire the marketing person, and I get that part. I'm just trying to figure out how you separate but don't separate the issue of community involvement because you have a project in the beginning. It's not as if you don't start with something in order to have the public communication, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, so the definition of local organization and the way the statute reads, to my understanding, is that a community can have its own sovereignty and agency, and a disproportionately impacted community can have its own agency or sovereignty, and receive funding through, say, a 501c3 or a tribal group or something. So that when a project that's funded, when a project comes into its community, that the state agency would fund a local organization who knows its people, who has respect and trust from the community to I wouldn't stage an opposition or stage some kind of resistance, but to gather and better understand what's happening to them. And so the funding, I understood, would go to organizations that are not related to who is proposing or getting funding for a project.
So I am hearing this conversation, and I do think this is something that we've kind of talked about, and it's a good flag here, but I don't think that what you're talking about is necessarily mutually exclusive of what we have here. A local organization could partner with a water project to do a community engagement plan, but what we're really hoping is that the community engagement plan and the actual act or the project are working together or somehow talking or communicating. And I think Kim touched on that earlier, is that we don't want one sphere or the other acting without coordination, because the community engagement would be as a result or in alignment's not the correct term, but happening because there is a project. So we want to make sure that the project and the communities are talking, and what we're trying to do in the rules is the best way of making sure that we ask for those partnerships. So local organizations could subcontract with the water project. They could be the primary applicant with the water project as a secondary, but there needs to be some sort of tie. And that's what I think we need to suss out in the way that the rules are written at this point. And maybe we aren't there and maybe we are, and it needs some nuance, but either the community or the water project acting alone is not in the intent of where we want these rules to go. We want them to be encouraged and required to speak to each other in the process. So I'm seeing Kim nodding, so hopefully that's a good thing. And I think I saw Kimberly's hand go up and down. So I would love to make sure if I'm taking us in a rabbit hole or not.
Yeah, I will just say that I think it's unfortunate that this statute, I think, is not really clear. Because yeah, while I earlier said I agreed with the department's interpretation that these tie to project, I also read that anyone under those definitions could apply for these. So I guess I would agree with Chris that it's less than clear. And just, I just want to maybe this is not for the rulemaking, but just to say out loud, I think one concern is that the way it's written right now, say it is a really destructive project. Let's just go that route. I'm not sure the project applicant would want a community engagement plan, but the community might feel that they want their voice heard, and therefore they want at least some sort of funding mechanism so that they can discuss the project. And I know, I agree, I think the statute is just, honestly, it's not well written, but I think there are it's nuanced enough that you could go either way on that. And so I guess I would just say, you know, I do think I'm hearing that the state wants to make sure that this is meaningful. And so I guess I would encourage you to think about a situation where it is a really big project coming in. Project proponents don't want to engage the community, but the community wants to engage in the decision-making processes of the project. So.
And I think under feasibility study grants, that could happen. Water project grants and loans, because of the structure of the statute and how you are, the requirement of how we fund based on public benefits. Like, I don't know how development of a community engagement and implementation of a community engagement plan under water project grants and loans, say, would produce environmental benefits if it's not connected to the proponents for the water project. But I could see it in the feasibility side. There's a lot more flexibility there, right? You're investigating the feasibility of a project and the potential impacts. And we do have various, we have had in feasibility study grants where it's not it is a nonprofit partner that is receiving the grant and leading the charge. And often, you know, sometimes they have a support letter from the project proponent, and sometimes not.
And I see Cheyenne's hand up. I want to make sure you have some space.
Yeah, I have a question not related, or maybe related. Actually, I don't know. I don't think it's directly related to this conversation, but it just kind of popped into my brain. It's for the agency. Is there a situation? Oh, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. My computer like glitched. Is there a situation in which you're receiving project applicants and having to rank them, prioritize them, or anything like that? Yes. Okay. So my recommendation would be that these community best practices is like within the prioritization of projects, and you are reviewing those community engagement plans as you are as you're prioritizing those projects, and like rewarding ones that have great community engagement plans, and vice versa.
And that is definitely the intent of the guidance documents that we'll be developing, and really thinking about ways to make sure that these are reflected and meaningfully reflected in the application. And Kim, I saw your hand pop up.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that's exactly what we're planning and doing. And depending on the funding opportunity, they have different, because they're funding different things, different ways of scoring, but each of them has a space for either collaboration or community benefit, or just like what we call like technical sufficiency, where, you know, if you're proposing to do something and it's not following the best practices, we would say that that would be like technically insufficient. Like, community engagement is its own field of study and practice, and there are experts in that, and we want to make sure that when we're using these public funds, we're funding those that are going to do community engagement well. And so those best practices for community engagement would slide into those existing spaces for evaluating projects.
And Peggy, if you have something you'd like to add.
So that's the part that I'm now hearing and connecting that's missing from this conversation, and would be good for the other agencies to hear. And that's to make sure that people understand the process for those, for where those funds will come in the first place. What are the criteria for, in this particular case, we're talking about the feasibility grants and then the implementation grants. How does that work? How do they actually get that money? How do they qualify? What are those processes? Because that's exactly what I think I'm hearing, is that it is meant to be that what we've been working on is trying to make sure that there is a conversation in the local communities, particularly when we're talking feasibility, about whether or not it really is feasible for these communities, for all communities, to do whatever it is that's being proposed. And that's really, really an important conversation. By the time you get to the implementation grant, it's important to have community conversation, but you're really only talking about a much narrower set of issues, because the agency, the commission has already decided that that is a valid project. And so at what point does the community really have any input in that? Certain amount of it, but not nearly as much. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So our time together has gone by very, very fast. So I do want to just pause and let everybody know that we probably are not going to be able to get to all the topics that everyone wanted to talk about today, but I will be proposing a couple paths forward. First and foremost, I would love to ask if you have any additional thoughts and feedback, please provide them to us in written form if you feel most comfortable doing that. It would be great if we would be able to have those from individuals, let's say by September 25th. So that's about a week and a half. If that's not doable, we would love to have you reach out and let me know. If you feel like you want to have more of a conversation and one-on-one, please feel free to reach out. We can discuss that as well. And then in the next couple of days, I will be formulating kind of a meeting summary and next steps and making sure that we reach back out to all of you and provide that information. Margot?
Yeah, I just want to chime in. So if we want to stay on the timeline of publishing our notice by October 1st, if we don't do any additional RACs, then we actually need to submit to the Secretary of State's office by the 24th, really at the latest, so they have time to conduct their review.
We will go back and circle on that, Margot.
Yeah.
At this point, I would say please just make sure that if you want to provide written comments, provide them to us and make sure that you feel like you have time to provide them and not to rush through that. All right. With that, Chris?
Yep. I just feel that this RAC process is probably one of the most hurried or short RAC processes I've ever seen. I agree, there's just only 6 parts to the rules. It's pretty short. But sometimes, a short poem or sonnet has a whole lot to it. I think the public would be well served with not rushing through this or trying to make an October 1st deadline. It's been going on for, since 2021, took a whole year off. I mean, all year long during 2023 and 24, there was like a very slow pace. And now as we enter the fall, I don't understand the need to be in a quick hurry with this. So I would encourage a more deliberate process, if that's okay with the department and the different agencies. Thanks so much.
And thank you for that, Chris. And that's why I do want to stress, we would love to get any written feedback in the next week and a half, acknowledging we are not here to rush this. We are here to be thoughtful and deliberate, and we do want to hear your feedback. To rush this deliberately would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to do. So just let's get your feedback and let's kind of recircle and we'll see what's going on. If you do have them by the end of this week, that would be wonderful. I'll send an update to everyone and just let them know. Kim?
Yeah, Charlotte, I don't know if you, I mean, Chris asked for a second RAC meeting in the chat. So what am I hearing that you're proposing that we get feedback before and discuss before making a decision on that? Or I'd be curious if other members of the RAC also feel that we should have another RAC meeting, or if nope, let's move forward. I'll note for folks what are the implications of having a second RAC would be that they would delay rule adoption probably till the March of 2025, and therefore the rules would not be in place for the upcoming funding cycle for water project grants and loans, where we anticipate having an application deadline in mid-January. That's the implication there for folks to consider.
Peggy?
And Chris, I hear your concern. I also am concerned that we worked really hard to get this process in statute to get it moving along. And rules are more easily changed than statute. But I really want to make sure that we have a process and we can see that it's being tried out, see the problems with it or the positives, and know if in fact we need to come back and adjust the rules. But I'm really interested in making sure that there is a public process opportunity in this next round of funding. And the whole reason, frankly, I'm just going to say the hiring process in the state of Oregon, when they create new projects and new rules, it takes 6 to 18 months to hire the staff and move it along. And that's really part of the issue. I would have liked to have had a conversation around the fiscal impact statements and whatever. But a conversation and not one that I'm going to be able to write any kind of testimony on. So anyway, thank you.
So it is 2 after 11. I do want to be mindful of your time. I do hear a lot of kind of continued interest and continued conversation. So I might just leave it as this was a very fast conversation, a very fruitful conversation. And I'm going to get back to all of you in just the next couple days in making sure that you realize that we are not going to just rush this through. We just want to make sure we digest what you've heard, regroup, and think thoughtfully of the next steps. But in the meantime, please make sure that if you have written comment, please send them to us. And we want to acknowledge your time and thank you for that. And also make sure you realize that we are actively about to push kind of some thought buttons. And we just want to make sure that we do the right ones to be deliberate in our actions, but thoughtful. So deliberate pace, basically, not rushing it, but moving forward. So with that, I just want to thank all of your time. And this was a very small group, but a very talkative group. So thank you for that.
And I'm going to stick around as well for maybe 10 minutes if anybody wants to add a public comment into the chat or share it now.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have the fiscal impact statement, Margot?
No, we do not write those until we hear from you. So
yeah.
Okay, I would suggest you do some draft ones.
We have started to do some draft ones. We're hearing conversations about it. We have a good idea from the lens that we utilize, what we think one could be, but obviously we're a bit siloed because we've been working on this for a while. So we want to make sure that we don't finish anything until we hear from those.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna stop the recording. Is that okay?
Yes, please do. And then I think we must have lost